Case, let me introduce Tom Rod.
Well, I did advertise on Facebook that I would play the banjo just a little bit. And now that I've done it, I would, in case there's anybody, that would be quite a coincidence, who actually came here to play the banjo. I'm not going to disappoint that one person. If you have your song sheets in front of you, let's sing one verse of two different songs just to get things kicked off. The first side is "Oh Freedom." We'll sing the first verse. It's a song that was spiritual, that came out of the post-Civil War period, and then it was adapted for the American Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s. And I think probably the first time I ever saw the inside of a jail was in Danville, Virginia in the summer of 1963, when I was with some civil rights protesters and encountered the music of that movement, and it turned my life around in a lot of ways. So we'll just sing "Oh Freedom." Oh freedom, oh freedom, oh freedom over me. I can't hear you. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, give yourselves a hand. That was great. Now let's turn over to the other side, something that you might not, maybe you have to hand me my copy because I don't have the words down in my head on this one. When I got into researching the story of the creation of West Virginia and the Civil War era, what I was delighted to find out was that at the time leading up to the Civil War, there was also a real strong singing movement against slavery amongst white people in America, to be blunt about it. And the most prominent singers in that were a family called the Hutchinson family, who actually toured with Frederick O. Douglass, and were some of the most popular. They were like the Beatles. They were extremely popular in the New England, Ohio area. They sang for Abraham Lincoln on his way to his inauguration, but they started their career in the 1840s, the Hutchinson family. And I have a book, in fact, all about their career right here. Some people take a look at it if they want. Fascinating story. It's something that I didn't even know about. So their song was called Emancipation. They do it to the tune of Old Dan Tucker. Hold the car, we'll try it. Hold the car, emancipation rides majestic through the nation, bearing on its train the story, liberty, a nation's glory. Here we go. Roll it along, roll it along, roll it along through the nation, freedom's car, emancipation. All right, thank you for singing. That was all the banjo playing we're going to get tonight. That's nice to start with a song. They say that human beings were probably singing before they were talking, singing like the birds to one another, and so it's nice to get into some of that. Tonight it's great to be here at the Culture Center. Thanks very much for having me. I came down here, I was remembering when I came up here, I think about 1973, so that would be 40 years ago, close to it. Came down here when I was living up in Hampshire County for some sort of cultural event. And I know that I never would have imagined back then that I'd be here under these circumstances tonight, but it just shows you if you stay alive long enough, you can get a lot of things done. Tonight I'm going to talk about a hero, a true West Virginia hero, J.R. John Robert Clifford. And the way I want to approach this talk is to show you a lot of pictures and just explain to you what these pictures show. I'm going to start out by sort of trying to put J.R. in his context in West Virginia history, if you don't mind. I mean, I could just tell you the story, but it seems to me it's very it's really useful to understand where this man came from and what brought him up and the people who were surrounded him in history. And then we're going to tell you about this famous case, the Carrie Williams case, which is his greatest case by far, although he had many interesting cases. Then I'm going to direct you, I'm going to answer some questions, and I'll just tell you right now, I brought a lot of kind of cool stuff for you that you can look at. And let me show you just some of the stuff that we're going to show you. First, out here laid out on this table are a whole bunch of court documents from the Carrie Williams case and other cases, including the original briefs from 1898 that are from the Supreme Court archives that we unearthed about 10 years ago when we started looking into this case. And everybody here is welcome to take home one of these. This is the souvenir edition of J.R.Clifford's newspaper, the Pioneer Press, that we prepared for the Niagara Centennial in 2006. And we've still got a few of these. These are printed on modern newsprint, so they'll turn brown rather quickly if you leave them out in the sun. They look kind of old already, but there's actually, in some ways, about as good a collection of raw historical material about J.R.Clifford and his era as you'll find anyplace else in this. Thanks to the great folks here at the Culture and History Library, these are, I'm not giving these away, but you can look at them. These are, what do you call it, printouts of pictures that were taken of J.R.Clifford's original paper, the Pioneer Press, which was one of the longest published African-American newspapers in America of its time. It was published for almost 30 years, from 1887 until 1913. And it's just a treasure trove. And speaking of who I need to give credit to right away, we'll see a picture of her here in the slideshow. There's a lady named Dr. Connie Rice at West Virginia University, whose biography whose PhD thesis was on, she started out writing on African-American political affairs in West Virginia, early African-American political affairs. We'll talk a little bit about that tonight. But she fell in love with J.R. Clifford. She said, I fell in love with a 100-year-old man. I mean, 100-year-old old dead man. And so she has written his biography. She also, and it's going to come out from Ohio State University Press next year. And I have it in it's available online, and I have a copy of it here. So that's a great resource that we have too. And there's nothing that I know about J.R. Clifford basically that I didn't get from Dr. Rice. So she, to all the honor and credit, along with all the other historians and archivists who have preserved this material. And his family, let's just make that clear. J.R. Clifford maybe recently is getting known to people here in West Virginia through our work publicizing him. Oh, we have a couple other things. Amy, you want to hold up our poster that we're going to show people? I'll get to the story of this case here. I'll have about 5 minutes left. These are free. You can take one of these. These are J.R. Clifford posters. They're made for elementary schools. We've burned through about 10,000 of them, but we still have quite a few. And over here, behind you, Sandy, you want to reach it there? There's something, the J.R. Clifford coloring book, which we are printing 15,000 of, thanks to the West Virginia legislature. We've already gone through 10,000 of those too. So, we've got a lot of research, and there's a bunch of books over here about his era that I just dragged along. I thought people would be interested in. But, so here's the court documents. There's some stuff you can take over there, and other stuff you can look at. John Robert Clifford. I'm going to stay on this microphone, but can you folks see the screen back there, all of you? Because I don't want anybody to be in the way. All right. I tend to want to wander around. But what happens if I come back here and talk? Is that okay? You can handle that? I'm a pretty loud person. Thank you. This will make it easier for me. This picture was from sometime in the 1880s by a famous, it's taken from a famous book called Men of Mark. And Men of Mark is for the history lovers here, and I guess probably the majority of you folks fall in that category then, so I'm not ashamed to tell you about things that are interesting to history buffs particularly. It's a treasure trove of information about famous African Americans of the late 1800s in the United States. The guy decided to say, who are the people, men by the way, I must admit, who are who are making it happen in the world of the African Americans in this country. And there's biographies of hundreds of people in there, and J.R. was included in that. He was born, however, in 1848, and we'll get to that date because it's a very important date, and lived to be, so the man was 87, can't do my math very well, 85 years old, and he practiced law until the day he died, and he died after he fell down the stairs, I guess. Really happened. He was at that time the dean of the West Virginia bar, which means he had practiced law longer than anybody else had in the state when he passed away, white or black. He was a Civil War veteran. He enlisted in 1865 at age 17. We'll talk a little bit more about the circumstances of that before the end of the war, and he saw quite a bit of action. After the war, he went to Storer College, which was founded by the Free Will Baptists in Harper's Ferry to educate teachers to teach African Americans in the school system of West Virginia. And his first job was as a public school principal and teacher in Martinsburg following his graduation from Storer College. During the period of time after the war, he worked in various jobs. He ran a writing school. He worked as a barber in Wheeling. Let's go on there. In 1882, let's see if we back up here, we can see that he was still a school teacher, but he wasn't content just being a school teacher. He decided that the way to uplift the race and to create power and progress was to promote awareness, literacy, and so he started as a newspaper publisher and continued, as you can see, for a long time publishing the Pioneer Press. Not content to be a publisher, he decided to read law. And he became an attorney, read law in Martinsburg, and was the first African American to be admitted to the bar, having taken the examination and passed it. There was one other African American guy who, before 1887, practiced in a couple of circuit courts in the state, but he wasn't really admitted before the state Supreme Court. And J.R. always said, "I'm the first." Let me just make that clear. So I'm sticking with that. He was a pioneer activist and a founder of the Niagara Movement. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Let's talk about his birthplace. He was born here. This is a U.S. Census records, by the way. These are all online. Anybody can get this kind of stuff. And if you get on here, you'll see Isaac Clifford and John Robert Clifford as one of his kids. And I can barely read it on here. Moorfield, 18 Moorfield, this is the 1870 census. His father was Isaac Clifford, his mother was named Septima. Isaac was a free African American when J.R. was born, and his parents and even his grandparents had been freed. J.R.'s grandfather was known where he came from over in that part of West Virginia, as Black Isaac, and there's a famous case that Henry Louis Gates describes where somebody tried to enslave Black Isaac, the grandfather, because you could say, well, you're my black guy, and he went to court and was successful, and Gates has found the records for that. There were numbers of free African Americans in Virginia at that time. Obviously, they were the minority, but masters would free people at the time of death. People would be able to buy their freedom sometimes. And under various circumstances, people became free enough so that there were thousands and thousands, but they lived under very constrained political circumstances. Couldn't vote, couldn't travel without a pass. And then, as what they call racial tension, for want of a better word, became more and more severe in the run-up to the Civil War, it became even more onerous upon free African Americans near Moorfield. Now, I've been to his birthplace in a little wide spot in the road, and there's a lovely old African American cemetery near there where some of his relatives, including his parents, are buried. I've been to his parents' birthplace. It was a farm. His father's farm was worth $400. That's quite a bit of money in that time. Yes?
Sir, when you said he couldn't travel without a pass, how would one get a pass, and how?
I guess you got it from the sheriff or some local authorities.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So he was raised on a farm, and he writes in his newspaper about his childhood as a farm boy, and he also writes about playing with white kids in the neighborhood. It was a rural community, but there were large slave-owning plantations down closer to Moorfield, so don't kid yourself, this was still Virginia, this was about slavery, and I'm forever going to have to talk a little bit about slavery here. I'll run through it as fast as I can, but you have to understand that's where J.R.Clifford came from. This is from one of our plays. I figure that's J.R.'s grandmother, and they're about to hide some escaped African-American slaves in our, because we do the story of J.R.'s life in one of our plays, and we've had many different wonderful young people play J.R. on the farm in Moorfield. Well, if you recall, at that time, we were governed to the United States Constitution, which enshrined slavery. Yes, and that was part of the deal when the slave states and the non-slave states, and for that matter, New York was a slave state when America was created, got together. And slavery was a very important part of the American economy, and huge fortunes both in New England. This is from a photograph. A group of slave children on board the Daphne. The slave trade was extremely important, and there was a lot of money to be made in that world, and that's where J.R. came up in. And, one of the things that we really need to appreciate as we understand that what happened that led to the American Civil War was that slaves were extremely valuable. And some people say one of the greatest transfers of human population in history took place in the decade before the American Civil War, when large numbers of slaves were sold to the cotton fields of the South from places like Virginia. Lots of people. And white abolitionists in West Virginia were perfectly happy to say that there were breeding farms right near Clarksburg. It wasn't just down in the deep old South, but it was a feeding area to sell people south because they, it was like having a dairy herd. It's as simple as that, and that was people's attitude towards it who ran slavery. Here's old Virginia, where we came from, and where J.R. came from over here in this area. Let's take a look at, just to understand the context of what J.R. arose in. This is the concentration of slaves and the numbers of people. How many slaves were in old Virginia in 1860? About 500,000. And here in, whoops, going too fast. Here west of the mountains, about 12,000. So two vastly different sorts of economy. But this was wealth. This was the kind of wealth that people did not want to give up because they could make a lot of money doing it. And many of the slaves would actually pass through Charleston here and stop and be rented off in earlier times to work in the salt mines here, and then take it further south. It was a frightening situation, and it's, it's part of our terrible legacy, and it's the origins of the modern color line, because the natural tendency of people to talk about races and all that stuff, they used to call it, the Irish a race, for gosh sake. The natural tendency to do that was reinforced by the financial incentives given by slavery. Well, naturally, human beings don't like to put up with that, and so as time, all over time, African Americans would leave the areas where there was slavery, especially as slavery was abolished in the North. And J.R.'s family, no doubt, but we don't have any instances of it, put up escaped slaves as they came through. And this is what they were running away from. We won't dwell on that. This is from Boston. Even in places like Boston, there were slave catchers looking for escaped slaves. And of course, there were forces of resistance. Tubman, Frederick Douglass. All right, 1848, the year J.R.Clifford. We're getting to the case here. Don't worry, folks. Just want to make it clear. 1848, the year that J.R.Clifford was born, this happened. And this, you could say, was really the cause of the American Civil War. Because when America got all this country, the Mexican War, when America got all this country, then the issue became, was this country going to be slave, or was it going to be free? And it became the issue of whether there was going to be an extension of slavery into the territories. John Brown cut his teeth over in Kansas on that issue. Here's the two other of these strong-jawed dudes. Jefferson Davis and Abraham Lincoln, and the secession of the South. And here we are in West Virginia. And the Civil War comes along. J.R.Clifford is, in 1859, 11 years old when John Brown has his rape at Harper's Ferry. And by 1863, the folks who really didn't have that much of a dog in the hunt when it came to preserving slavery and having lots of wealth, the majority of those people were able to create the state of West Virginia, which had a lot of good results. Not everything about it was good, but on the race issue, it was really a positive step anyhow. And one of the things that led to emancipation and to the story of J.R.Clifford were these guys. It became clear that although when the Civil War started, Lincoln was ready to let the South continue to have slavery. It's true. People don't, they say that. But soon it became clear that the way to win the war, one way to help win the war, was to start recruiting large numbers of African Americans to be soldiers, and thousands of them gave their lives for the Union cause. And that, once they'd done that, it was emancipation or else. That was it. There was no for everybody. And they enlisted, as I say, by the thousands and thousands. And there's a drawing done by a friend of ours. And this is a young man in one of our plays who plays J.R.Clifford. And here's the state of West Virginia, which by the time J.R. got out of the Civil War, had been created here at the Wheeling Convention. There's the Convention Hall. There's Granville Hall, a great abolitionist who, what was that? Gordon Patel. That's Gordon Patel. And here's some of these guys. Here's Storer College. Okay, so the war comes along, and and it happens, and it's over. Now we've got to talk about what are we going to do after the war. Well, this was a Storer College campus, former campus, which was at that time a U.S. Armory, and that's where J.R.Clifford went to school. And here's some pictures of Storer College, where he went to college. There's the Curtis Free Will Baptist Church there on the campus where we put on our play. Okay, J.R. gets out of college, and he starts to become a teacher. West Virginia schools are racially segregated by constitutional requirement at that time. There he is, extremely literate man. Okay, the promise is great. We have segregation, right? It's in the Constitution, but we have the guarantee in the Constitution, particularly in the 14th Amendment, that everybody enjoys equal rights. Maybe they're separate but equal, but they're equal. I mean, at least the fiction is separate. Separate but equal school system, except for one thing that somehow is just too offensive to the power structure that has been displaced by the Civil War. And that, of course, is the ballot box. The ballot box. I often say that the image that people give of the civil rights movement is completely wrong when they talk about sitting in the back of the bus and sitting at lunch counters. I'm talking about voting. I'm talking about people, a whole race, whatever that means, a whole group of people being disqualified from voting because they have an ancestor that came from Africa. And yet that's what happened after the American Civil War. It took quite a while for it to really get going. It really took to 1900 for it to completely happen. It was quite an event. I know that J.R.Clifford did this. He did this in 1871. In 1871, they passed something called the Flick Amendment here in West Virginia, which restored the rights of Confederate veterans, those traitorous Confederates like that. It restored their right to vote, but the flip side of that was it restored and guaranteed the right to vote to African Americans. Now, with a momentous achievement, what was even more momentous is that African Americans in West Virginia were able to hold on to that right consistently when in Virginia it was taken away from them. I'll just tell you a little number that maybe shock you, but or South Carolina or North Carolina or wherever you want, in the states of the former Confederacy. In 1920, there were 6 representatives in Congress from West Virginia and 6 representatives from South Carolina. The popular vote in West Virginia for Congress was 220,000 people. The popular vote in Congress from South Carolina, 20,000 people. There were no African Americans, No poor whites because they were knocked out by the poll tax. The South was not a democratic place until 1964. The Voting Rights Act restored that. There's J.R.Clifford voting. I would say this is probably the seminal experience of his life, except he saw lynching in the 1870s in Martinsburg, and that was the other thing that really turned him around. And behind these laws was terrorism, and of course there was the world of segregation. West Virginia had a lot of social segregation, but it wasn't by law so much, it was more by custom. Okay, now, we've gotten to the point of 1900 or so, and this is when we're going to just talk about a little bit about J.R. Here he is with William E.B. Du Bois, perhaps the most famous African-American intellectual and leader of his time. And this group of gentlemen are representatives of what Du Bois himself called the talented tenth. These were the middle class, the intellectuals, the barbers, the doctors, the lawyers from the African-American community who were not just satisfied with Booker T. Washington's notion of let's learn to be bricklayers, who wanted full legal rights, specifically to defend the right to vote throughout the South. And here's J.R., a few of these guys, just a couple of great pictures. Here's the Pioneer Press, this is what it actually looked like. Here's Connie Rice, Dr. Connie Rice, his biographer. This is Marjorie, right? Clifford. Huh? Mary, she's a great granddaughter of J.R., I believe, and I'm not sure she's maybe a cousin or something like that. But she's a family historian, and here's a picture of J.R.'s paper, and here's a closer picture of J.R. and this is the Niagara Centennial, the beginning of the modern civil rights movement, 1906, Harper's Ferry. And here's Storer College, just a picture of the great school that he went to. One of the things that the Niagara women, people make a big deal about, and it really is true, is that women were full delegates to that thing and very active. And here's a picture of J.R. as it appeared in the NAACP newspaper of September 1918. Okay, how much time have we got? Huh?
All right.
I want to tell you about this case now. So that's a little bit about J.R.Clifford. You can see farm boy to teacher to principal to activist, always homegrown, always here in West Virginia, always fighting to keep the right to vote and pushing back against, and believe me, there were people, Senator Byrd rose to power in this state race baiting. We forgave him for that afterwards, after he apologized about 1 million times, and rightfully so. But there were forces, always have been forces in West Virginia that wanted to push back, just like they pushed back in Virginia and pushed back in North Carolina. But luckily, because we're a mix of sort of North and South, people have been able to hold on to some basic rights. All right. I could say more about that, but I got 1 million lines. Let's talk about this case. What the heck? All right, this is Coketon. Little Coketon, ain't nobody in Coketon anymore. It's right near, if you've ever been to Thomas in Tucker County, if anybody's been there, which is down the road from Davis, which is up the hill from Parsons, down the road from Thomas, a little bit down the river, a couple miles, is a place that was called Coketon. And this was all part of the empire. This is the first place that the railroads came into West Virginia and started hauling coal and timber out in large numbers before they came into the southern coal fields. This is early. This is right after the Civil War. And Henry Gassaway Davis was the guy who had the vision. He saw the coal, and he was kind of a front man for a bunch of wealthy bankers in New York, J.P. Morgan and all these guys, but he was wealthy too. But he was their guy in West Virginia, and when he told them how much coal there was, they said, let's go get some of that. So they came down there, they built railroads into there, and one of the things they did was they made coke, because coke is used in the making of steel. So you take coal and you combust it in the absence of oxygen, and you get coke, pure carbon, which takes the impurities out of the iron ore, making steel. So they built thousands and thousands of these ovens, which there's still old ones up there, along the hillside, and then the coal came, they burned it in there, and they took it all off to Pittsburgh. So they had to get the coal out, and they needed people who could work hard. So they had a substantial population of Hungarians, Italians, Polish, African Americans, lots of thousands of people came to these towns, and they were real boom towns. There's old Henry Gasoline days. Well, the law in West Virginia at that time said that if you had more than 10 colored, I believe was the term they used, but 10 African-American children in a county, the school board had to set up a school for them. And this is not the Coaching School, by the way. This is just an illustrative picture from some history book. But if there were less than 10, the county could arrange for some alternative education. And in fact, there was a time when the kids from the black kids back in the segregation era, I know people who went to school in another county. The county school board sent them over there in a taxi. Okay, so they would hire teachers. And they hired a lady named Carrie Williams. Now, I wish I had a picture of the real Carrie Williams, but I don't. And she was a graduate of Storer College, and some of J.R.'s family lived there in Copeton. His brother, I think, was working there. And so, anyhow, J.R., these are from different shows that we've done around the state. I just picked pictures out of there. J.R. went to the school. There's a bunch of the kids reciting, see the little benches. Justice Starcher made those little benches. And he and Carrie Williams talked to one another. We know this. And she explained a certain situation to him, which was that the school board would only pay her for 5 months, even the 5 months of teaching, even though the white schools were 8 months. Well, and how do I know this happened? You say, well, how do you know this? I have here the transcript of the trial in 18, and I'll pass these around. But this is, I can't make this stuff up. I don't want to. This is a story that's good enough on its own. Pass these around here. I'll keep one for myself to read. Take a look. But this is the transcript, and this is what our play is based upon. This transcript, which we found in an old musty drawer of the Tucker County Courthouse. Well, by whom were you employed to teach school? By the Board of Education. Did you have a contract? This is the Carrie Williams. So I should figure out how the trial happened. Then I'll read you this. All right. So J.R. says to her, she says, now this part we have to use our imaginations, but you know the conversation had to happen because she says that they consulted. He said, well, what should I do? And he said, well, do you have any savings? She said, yes, my husband and I have some savings. And he says, well, what I want you to do is go ahead and teach for 3 months. And then, after you've taught those 3 months, we'll bring a claim against the school board for 3 months' pay. And she says, okay, but am I guaranteed? She said, no, I'm not guaranteeing you anything, but that seems to me to be the best strategy. So, lo and behold, she went ahead and she taught for 3 extra months, and then she filed suit in the Circuit Court of Tucker County, West Virginia, and against the Tucker County School Board for the grand total of $120. 3 months' pay at $40 a month. And it got to trial. Took a year or two to actually get the case to trial. And Carrie testified. Well, he said, J.R.Clifford is asking the questions here. Did you have a contract with the Board of Education? No, sir. Well, state why there was no contract. Well, they refused to sign the contract for 8 months, and they wanted me to sign the contract for 5 months, and I would not do it. And they would not sign it for 8. Why did you not consent to sign it for 5 months? Because I know the white school term was 8 months, and I saw counsel and went on. Did you teach out the full term, 8 months? How many months did they pay you for your services? 5 months. And then it goes on and on, and then the cross-examiner, the prosecuting attorney cross-examines her. He said, you never had a written contract for 8 months, did you? No, sir, not a written contract. And then she said, did you ever file a duplicate of your certificate? Now the certificate, didn't you go up there? This is the prosecuting attorney the lawyer for the school board, not the prosecuting attorney, the lawyer, because she's suing the school board for $120. She says, well, didn't you go up there at the end of 5 months and want blanks to continue the school on for 8 months? And didn't he tell you that he wouldn't give you any blanks for any more and demand from you the term register at the end of the 5 months? Answer, he demanded my term register. It seems to me I did want the blanks, and he refused to give them to you. I think he did. You did not give him your term register, did you? No, sir, I didn't. Wait, it goes on. Here, pass this around. Well, that's right in the play. I'd forgotten that. I haven't read that transcript for several years. This is the register right here. Total enumeration last made in the district. This is her monthly summary to the Board of Education of Fairfax District. Pupils engaged in the study of orthography, 26. Reading, penmanship, arithmetic, grammar, history. Number of cases of tardiness. I mean, she was a tough, strict, good school teacher. And at the end of this trial, let me see, I forget, let's see what the next picture is. I don't want to move to the end of the trial quite away. I think that's them consulting right now. Whoops, there's another version of them consulting. And another version of them consulting. And this is H.A. Meyer. H.A. Meyer, he was the lawyer for the school board. And, he was the vice president of the school board, and he was also on the board of directors of the Davis Coal and Coke Company. And what was his explanation? His explanation was, well, there aren't as many colored children, so therefore we don't have as much money for them, so we have to accord it. And he said, well, isn't it true that Davis Coal and Coke Company pays most of the taxes? He says, that's true. He said, well, could you just raise the taxes on the coal company? Oh, objection, objection. At least that's the way it goes in our trial. He looks like a villain too, doesn't he? Okay, so lo and behold, the Tucker County School Board, not school board, the Tucker County jury, 12 farmers, and we got their names right here. You can look at them here. I call them farmers, I don't know. These are my heroes. William Brady, Charles Campbell, Hugh Hockman, I.S. Judy, George Kerr. Well, they unanimously voted to award Carrie Williams $120. Pretty good. And tell you a couple more things about the trial, just so you... Who was the judge? You know, it always helps to have a judge who's on your side of these things. And J.R.Clifford was no fool. I don't know how he worked it out, but the judge, I haven't been into this thing here for quite a while either. The judge was a guy named Joseph Hoke. And Joseph Hoke was a unionist Republican. Republican being the party of Lincoln at that time. And he was actually on the board of trustees of Storer College. In other words, yeah. So, I have to say that, I'm not saying that the judge made the jury go a certain way, but I'm just saying that J.R.Clifford was able to present his case without interruption and make a good argument. Who knows, maybe the judge gave the jury a little bit of, members of the jury. We don't have his charge, so we don't know what he told them. Well, and there's another important judge in this story too. Okay, Tucker County Board of Education appeals the jury's verdict to the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals. It takes until 1898 to get this case up to the state Supreme Court. And why do the Tucker County jury, $120? It seems like it might be the principle of the thing here a little bit, but why do they think that they even have a chance? Because the jury has spoken. Well, the national legal climate was terrible in the United States for African American rights. And all over the place, Plessy versus Ferguson was about to happen in the United States Supreme Court, which basically said that African Americans don't have a right to citizenship, knocking out all kinds of rights. So here's a few more pictures of the trial. I just love this image. By the way, if you take a look at my juries here, you see I got women on the juries. Big historical inaccuracy there. That wasn't like in When was that? The women got on juries in West Virginia? 1957. Unbelievable. There it is, folks. So, but we just couldn't stand to do that. And of course, African Americans, but African Americans were constitutionally entitled to be on juries in West Virginia, thanks to a U.S. Supreme Court decision in late 1880s. Whoops, more cases. Oh, look at that one there. Oh yeah, there's that lawyer for the school board, that evil fellow. And this, by the way, this is Hoke. That is Judge Hoke, by the way, a real Judge Hoke from Lincoln County. That's George Doherty there. Yeah. We'll come back to it. Just remember this scene here. Okay, J.R. argues the thing in front of the Supreme Court. Now, what we have here that I can show you, these are the original briefs that were filed in 1898 in the West Virginia Supreme Court. And as I was telling a few people when we first came in here, finding these things was just the luck of the needle in a haystack. They were in a room bigger than this, cardboard boxes to the ceiling with just little aisles down between them. And like the third box we looked in, we didn't really know where we were looking. I'm telling you the truth. This was a little bit of divine providence in action when we came across these. But, so I don't know what the arguments were at the Supreme Court. They don't transcribe those like they do the trial, but I can figure out what they were because they make their arguments in writing here. And so the basic argument that the school board said was no written contract. No written contract. Her contract was only for 5 months, and therefore we didn't have any obligation to pay no written contract. But J.R.'s line was, but every contract must comply with the law, and the Constitution provides for the equivalent education of African American children. That means the same amount of time, and their teachers have to be paid the same, by the way. So, the case was argued in the West Virginia Supreme Court. And here's some of our versions of the Supreme Court. As you can see, we just sort of play it fast and loose when we do those. This is Derrick Bell, Chief Justice of the Maryland Supreme Court. She's a justice on the D.C. Supreme Court. This is the late Joe Albright from Parkersburg. That's my boss and soulmate, Larry Starcher. And that's, oh, there's different folks here. Mike Ellington from Morgantown runs the mountain lair. Okay, another great judge. As a matter of fact, one of the great heroes of the whole case, Marmaduke Dent. Now, you may have heard of his name. He was the judge who wrote the opinion in the Carrie Williams case, and that opinion is in your newspapers there. Judge Dent was, he was from Grafton. And if you go up in that area, I actually live about 2 miles from what used to be this little community of Dent on Route 92. But there's Dent's Run, and it's a family name up there, been around for a long time, those folks. And he was a lawyer. He was the first graduate of WVU College of Law. And so they named some society for him. But he came to the West Virginia Supreme Court of Appeals sometime in the 1880s, I guess. And he was sort of a small-town populist lawyer who actually made a lot of money suing railroad companies on behalf of farmers. These trains would go through people's fields and cast off all these sparks and burn down barns and haystacks and things like that. He would represent these farmers. And so Judge Dent was on the court at that time, and he said here he served from 1893 to 1904. And he wrote the opinion in the Carrie Williams case, and he was a poet. He's the only West Virginia Supreme Court justice to ever have a book written about him. It's called An American Judge. It was written in the 1960s by a scholar who was impressed, not by his legal work, but by the fact that he was such, I don't mean a literal poet, rhyming things, but he was a very expressive writer. And he wrote for women's rights. He was very sympathetic to ordinary people, a populist. His tenure on the court was overlapped with a change in the court that became much more friendly to railroads and corporations. He was more of the old school, but you know, we need to, as opposed to we need a better business climate. So he was kind of the anti-business climate people. He was more for ordinary people's rights. Well, he got a hold of this opinion, and he just did the right thing. And what he did was write an opinion that is absolutely, from a legal point of view, unprecedented. Nobody in America had ever said some of the things that he said in that opinion. I just read you a few of his lines. Counsel insists that the colored people, having been allotted their pro rata share of the school funds, have no right to complain. Remember, there are less black kids, therefore they get less money. He says, the law guaranteed them 8 months of school, and though it cost many times in proportion to what the white schools cost, they should have had it. Money value should not be set off against moral and intellectual improvement. A nation that depends on its wealth is a depraved nation, while moral purity and intellectual progress alone can preserve the integrity of free institutions and the love of true liberty under the protection of equal laws in the hearts of the people. The judgment of the Tucker County jury is affirmed. That's pretty, that was the one, I mean, that was the final thing, the conclusion, but he has many other excellent lines in here. Here's the takeaway point of law that this case stands for in West Virginia law. Discrimination against colored people because of color alone as to privileges, immunities, and equal legal protection is contrary to public policy and the law of the land. Very progressive thing. You know, courts in Pennsylvania, Ohio, they weren't saying these sorts of things. Of course, they weren't coping with segregation like we were coping with here. So what was going on here around this time? I mean, how could a judge feel free to say that in the face of the fact that there was this Ku Klux Klan thing going on, you know, in different places? And I'll tell you, one of the things that we have to realize is that West Virginia was, at that time, becoming somewhat of a magnet for African Americans who were moving up to the south to work in the southern coal fields, even then, at this period. And people had a sense for that. And it's, if you really get into the history, what you have people saying is good paying jobs, schools, and the right to vote were three things that made the West Virginia an attractive place to go for people who were coming from Alabama or Georgia or Louisiana or those sorts of places. So the West Virginia elite, even people like Dent who were, you know, part of the elite, the lawyers had a sense, and there was also this Republican tradition, and by that I mean the Unionist Republican, but the anti-slavery tradition of people like the Hutchinson family that really, Wheeling and Clarksburg and those areas were more of the home to it, but there was also that religious sentiment, Free Will Baptists, the branches of the Methodist Church that were against slavery, this is in the white community. So there was a climate that allowed a man like Dent to do this, but still it took courage, he didn't have to do it. And his fellow justices went along with it. So great guy, Marmaduke Dent, and let's see what, by now I've sort of lost track of where these pictures are, but we'll go on and see what else I've got in here. Well, this is the decision of the court, and there's that language that I just read to you. Affirmative action. Okay, in our play, we have one more scene. We start out with J.R.Clifford visiting Carrie Williams at her school, because I believe that happened. Oh, it could have been at I don't think it was at a cocktail party. I mean, it had to happen someplace. So then I go to 1933 in the play. And I don't know that J.R. and Carrie ever met up again in life, but I like to think of it, and I like to think of them and, on the last day of his life. They come in and they talk about how much still needs to be done. That's part of the way the play goes. Here's some of the things. Oh, this is why I went. This is Frida Clifford. She is a niece of J.R. and she was born in 1923. She lives in Kaiser. And as far as I know, she's still kicking good. And she remembers Uncle John very well. And so I have her in the last scene too, but I didn't, as a 10-year-old girl. And there's sort of a passing of the torch. That's what we like to do with this JR stuff, is to indicate that, you know, the old civil rights song says that freedom is a constant struggle. And this young lady is also a descendant of J.R.Clifford. She's a steward from, she's a lawyer over in Virginia. This lady's a librarian in Moorfield, I think. And here's J.R.'s final resting place. This is his wife's place. They were realize that she lives in 1940. This is wrong, this date, by the way. It should be 1848. That's history for you. But he was a corporal. Here's the Constitution. These are the people who set in place the great modern civil rights movement that led to not only the desegregation of public facilities in the South, but far more importantly, the Voting Rights Act, which it restored democracy to a large area of this country. I always say, West Virginia, the single biggest thing I think we have to be proud of in West Virginia coming out of the Civil War is that we were able to preserve democracy because we created a new state. Those people who said we're going to stick with the Union, we're going to create a new political climate, and that sort of thing. Look what happened in Virginia. And my wife says I'm wrong to say we ducked a bullet. That sounds like, but sometimes it's what you didn't do that can be your greatest accomplishment. And it wasn't just what happened back then, but it set the stage for something else. I mean, there came a time. We've been talking about J.R. since 2004. When I first learned a little bit about him and ran into that transcript, and I said, man, that would be a play. And we did that at the College of Law, Starcher and I. That was fun. We're still involving some of these people in our programs. And this was our first performance of the J.R.Clifford and the Carrie Williams Case play. That one didn't have the last scene with him and Carrie getting together, and also didn't have the schoolroom scene. This was just the courtroom drama itself. And this is in Morgantown. This is Delegate Charlene Marshall over here, Jackie Dooley, Kathy George here, and Mike Ellington. And this is it's J.R.Clifford Day in Morgantown. We celebrate him. He's a relative of the great West Virginia writer Henry Louis Gates. They're cousins. That is what it comes down to. And that was at a play. This is Paul Clifford. He's in the book. There's a memoir by him. He's a great-grandson who lived in and was a teacher down in Georgia someplace. And interestingly, he married like a great-granddaughter of Booker T. Washington. It's an amazing union. This is Mary Clifford, J.R.'s daughter, and we have her in our new West Virginia statehood play. She travels with her dad. In 1913, this is true, it's in Connie's book, in 1913, J.R. Clifford, then how old would he be? Help me out here, 65 years old. 65 years old, he traveled with the publisher of the McDowell Times, which was an African-American newspaper, to a meeting of the Republican and Progressive parties in Parkersburg to talk about a unified slate to elect African-Americans in West Virginia. The guy, he just ferociously important, but this was his young daughter, and she symbolizes to me sort of that passing of the torch. I guess that's her graduation from Storer College. This is the finale of one of our performances, and I don't know, that might be the Martin Luther King Men's Chorus, I'm not sure. That might be a Kaiser, I can't remember, we've done so many of them. This is my boss, Larry Starcher, and this is Debbie McHenry, a friend of ours who's been supportive of the whole show. Here's a couple of two great inheritors of the J.R. Clifford legal tradition, Trent Redmond and Thomas Vernon. Thomas is at the State Supreme Court, two African-American lawyers here in town. This young lady is a great granddaughter of J.R., and I think that's in March. That a plaque. This one of the things that I like to do in this history, the whole point of this stuff is we can't know all the details, but we can imagine quite reasonably what would have happened. And then when we reenact it, we say those imaginings aren't so unreasonable at all. I mean, people did this. People made it up. They didn't have a script. They didn't know what they were going to be. They didn't know they were going to win the case. They didn't know whether they're going to be able to vote next year, but they found the courage to keep on pushing, and that's what the message I get from J.R. Clifford, and that's the show. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take some questions. We didn't go too much over time.
No, we saw that.
Good.
I know we have some folks who are relatives of J.R.
Oh,
They came.
you want to come up and introduce yourselves? Okay.
Let's give them a hand.
Let's give them a hand.
This is our sister, Margie Green. We are descendants of J.R.Clifford. Our grandmother and great-grandmother and J.R.Clifford's mother was sisters. How
Our
well?
great-grandmother and J.R.Clifford were brothers and sisters.
Okay. All right. She's older than me.
And smarter. And where are you from?
We're from here in Charleston.
Charleston.
And I'm the director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Bell Course. So.
Oh, I know you've been in one of our shows. I just can't remember.
Right. And then we have our other sister, Ellen. She had a coughing spell. But thank you for what you're doing. We appreciate that.
Well, it's a real honor to tell his story. I give a lot of credit to Kitty Dooley,
Yes.
who's a lawyer here in town, who I said to Kitty, Kitty, I need an African-American partner to do this thing. She said, I'm working all the time. I said, that's okay, Kitty, just give me some cover.
One thing,
No, but
Gates is a nephew of J.R. Clifford.
is a nephew.
Not a cousin, a nephew, because he's our first cousin.
Yes, and I have a copy of his. I'll just show you a couple of books up here in case anybody's interested. Thank you for coming, and I hope I didn't make too many mistakes.
Well, you're fine.
Okay. Have you read Connie's book yet?
No, I haven't.
Well, you're going to see a lot of stuff in there that really opened my eyes, especially the stuff about politics. Just a wonderful story how active that guy was. He had more faith in politics than most people have today, and under much tougher circumstances, too. This is Ron Lewis's great book on black coal miners in America. This is John Staley's book on the salt industry here in Charleston, a lot about African Americans in that. This is called Emancipation, the Making of the Black Lawyer in America. Every state in the Union is covered there. This is the only biography I know of Carter G. Woodson, who was a great example of the opportunities that West Virginia provided. His family moved to the Huntington area so that he could get an education. He worked as a coal miner while he went to college here in West Virginia, became the father of black history. Just a great story. Here's a book about Negro troops in the Union Army. That's a famous book. Oh, well, here's what I was going to look for. This is a paperback of Henry Louis Gates' book about growing up in Piedmont.
Oh, yeah.
Well, yeah, the names have been changed to particular. And here's a fascinating thing. What can I say? Show and tell. You know, this is Carter Woodson, the father of black history, was the second African American to get a PhD from Harvard, and the first would have been William E.B. Du Bois, I believe. And he wrote his PhD thesis, very few people learned, on the creation of West Virginia in 1912. And yeah, there's a microfilm copy here, and they wouldn't let me make a copy because Harvard was being snooty about it or something like that. It was goofy. So I contacted Harvard, and I paid like $120 for this thing. It's crazy, but nevertheless, it's really good. It's a good description of the creation of West Virginia. Here's an interesting book that we got from a library, and they never wanted it back. I don't know what the story is. I hope they don't have a warrant out on me. But this is called The Negro in West Virginia Before 1900, and it's a really interesting book. One of the early histories that you can get a lot of stuff. This is 1954. But Woodson's when he came to West Virginia State as the dean at what was West Virginia State, his first project was to collect, I don't know if it's in print, information on early African American schools in West Virginia. And he did he and a bunch of graduate students put together a really excellent book. And it's also available in academic circumstances. Well, let me see, there's one more here. This is Connie Rice's book on African American history in Monongalia County that kind of got her started. And so, I'll just say to you, as a white guy who's been interested, who fell into this stuff, it's been an honor to work on this. You know, the color line is crazy. It's just insane. It's obviously a social construction, but there it is, and it's been with us for 300 years. The only way I know to make things better is just to talk about it and nibble at it and try to surround it with affection and intelligence, and you know, gradually you hope that things will change. But and I do think that that's possible. But it's been very exciting to me to do this next project, the one we're working on now, that involves these people, abolitionists, white abolitionists who were involved in creating the state of West Virginia. Because what I see there is, my hero there is a guy named Granville Hall, who was West Virginia's second Secretary of State. His parents were indicted by the Harrison County grand jury. He lived near Shinston, and his father ran a tannery. They were indicted by the grand jury for subscribing to newspapers that preached against slavery. People in Wheeling went to prison for teaching slaves to read. There were white people who chafed under the regime of slavery, just as there were African Americans who chafed under it. Obviously not as much, but they chafed under it. And you know, I can't imagine what would it be like to even live in Virginia in 1950 and realize that 80% of the people in my state really don't have the right to vote. I mean, it's like living in a dictatorship, right, or something like that. So I think one, it gives us things to be proud of as West Virginians, but looking at people like Granville Hall, looking at those people or Gordon Battelle, who was a great Clarksburg minister who died in the Civil War, who was a fervent advocate against slavery. So there were whites and blacks working very hard against slavery, and it's been good for me to be able to tell their story too. Tonight I was telling J.R. and the Carrie Williams case, and I'm glad to have a chance to do it. Questions?
It seems awfully remarkable that 1895, that this was a jury trial before it goes to the Supreme Court, and a jury in Tucker County sides with Carrie Williams.
Yeah.
That speaks well to folks in Tucker County.
Oh, I think it does. I think it was Clifford's strategy. Work, sue for the money. When I do the play, I don't have his argument to the jury, but I wrote an argument to the jury, and I said, ladies and gentlemen, she worked for that money. She did the work. And then I even made up a little bit of a discussion between a couple of jurors. They say, well, I don't know. And then this other guy says, well, she did the work, didn't she? You know, so I think those Tucker County jurors, I think it was a good strategy by J.R. to tell her to do that, rather than to try to file a suit beforehand and get it all settled out. Let her do the work. And that's my theory, that the jury, there was a fertile field. They respected work. They were working people.
Yeah, I was going to say, I can't remember now, but wasn't there a story in there that he was practicing as a lawyer and someone beat him? Hit him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, tell that story.
Okay.
Because it shows he wasn't he might have been real likable, but he
Well,
was
I want to tell you the good stories now. I mean, the one that makes him totally likable. No, he, one day, and he describes it in his newspaper, he was trying to impanel it's in this newspaper here too. He was trying to impanel a jury, and he wanted to seat some African Americans on the jury, and the prosecutor was so upset about that. It was a criminal case. I think his client was African American, and the prosecutor was so upset that he attacked J.R. in the courtroom with a couple of heavy inkwells and beat him on the head until, according to the story, the blood ran down into his shoes. And but J.R. got him down, because J.R. was always a very masculine, manly guy. And J.R. got him down, but they had to pull him off J.R., or he would have made short work of it. That's the way J.R. told the story. Well then, but that's not the end of the story. Then J.R. Prominently displayed that bloody shirt in his office on the wall. And when the next election came up, he rode around Berkeley County on his bicycle. He was an avid bicyclist. This is like 1900 or something like that. And he once wrote that that was the time that he felt more free from the constraints of race than any other time. I mean, I just felt like, you know, a human being on his bicycle for some reason. I think I ride my bicycle. I feel the same way sometimes. Not race, but I just feel, you know. Anyhow, the point is, he rode on his bicycle and he would go to little towns and he'd set up in the middle, and he'd hold up the shirt and he'd say, vote against this guy. He's a scoundrel, he beats people up in court. True. And he was defeated by 500 votes. Yay! True story as far as I know. I mean, he was irrepressible. He would refuse to, where the train went through Virginia near there, segregation was not, in Virginia, on public accommodations, was not the law of the land, but it was in Virginia. He actually would refuse to ride on the train where it went through. You family members may have heard these stories, but he would refuse to ride on the train where there were Jim Crow cars, and he would walk sometimes 6 or 7 miles rather than to ride in a Jim Crow car. He had a lot. He did it. The most important case that he lost was he represented an African American farmer in Morgan County where there was no African American school, and in a case called Martin, I think. And in that case, the West Virginia Supreme Court said that the U.S. Constitution did not guarantee, did not trump the West Virginia Constitution. In other words, that they didn't have to have an integrated school. That was a loser, but he didn't give up. I mean, he just went on to the next thing. You know, he was 50 years ahead of his time on that one. Brown versus Board of Education resolved that one, but we have some papers for that one here too.
Was J.R.Clifford, was he in private practice for his career? Did he ever like try to somehow work for the government to affect change that way?
No, that's sort of interesting. He never did. I think he was very much his own man. And I think if you wanted to look at the sort of the history of the veterans, African American veterans, and after the war, people who were politically active, there were people like Martin Delaney, pretty famous African American, highest ranking African American soldier. People went on. They got patronage jobs. Some of them. I mean, there was. You serve the country, you serve the party. The Republican Party would give people jobs when they were in power. But Clifford wouldn't cotton to the party machinery, and I think that's how he tended to get jobs. I really think that's true. He was just too uppity in that sense. Independent, I think, is the right one.
Tom, I did not see which regiment number J.R. served in.
13th United States Colored
That's what I thought.
Artillery.
And we have a list of what they did, where they were stationed right here in a book.
You do?
We also have the section back here of African American history here in West Virginia that has a lot of books that folks might be interested in if they could come in. We also have all the census records, which list clear back into slave times, the 1850 and 1860 slave census here in the West Virginia counties. So recommend folks come in here to the library and even do genealogical work on their black families and historical work on things like the colored troops I just mentioned. So come on in.
And this is the reason I sort of got on this statehood thing and this West Virginia thing is that because we're the J.R.Clifford project, which I'm a volunteer co-director with Kitty Dooley on, and Amy Duncan here at Friends of Blackwater. We've been doing programs related to West Virginia statehood through the lens of civil rights, through the lens of how the state makers dealt with slavery and how Washington dealt with it. And it's not a story that I want to get into tonight, but it's a fascinating story. But you could see that I am quite willing to point to one of the great, what I consider to be the achievements of the people who created West Virginia was that they were able to by breaking away from Virginia, they created a society that was more democratic, not perfect in any way, shape, or form, but far more democratic and with good consequences. And they sacrificed a great deal for it. People gave their lives to create that, white and black. And an anniversary like this 150th anniversary is a good time to remember that. Think about our responsibilities to the people for 150 years from now. Thank you, everybody. sir.
Yeah.
Don't forget to get one of these newspapers in a minute.
Here, we have a whole section of African American history here in West Virginia.
We got these posters here.
It's real easy to pretty interesting. You know, how people are listed going all the way back to, you know, there are mulattoes listed, and there are some Native Americans listed, and you know, the mixed race situation is interesting. And take a look at it, you know, it's right here, and we're even open on Saturdays. We're open on Saturdays, and on Thursday evenings, we're open at 8 o'clock at night. Okay. Come in and take a look, we'll show you around. All free, all no fee.
Okay.
I haven't had dinner yet. I'm not retired like you.
See, I see Morton all the time. I talk to Morton. Morton is my husband. Yeah, I hear from him. Yeah.
Oh, this.
I hear Morton. Talk to Morton.
Well, tell him Jim Williams asked. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, nice things.